Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news, which as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hope you're having an amazing day. We have several very interesting stories which have emerged over the past 24 hours. So let's get into it, the first of which concerns AMD's response to the RTX 2060 price cuts. In case you missed that story, which I covered I believe yesterday, if not the day before, Nvidia have responded to the release of the RX 5600 XT, well, it's released in a few days anyway, by preemptively cutting the price of the RTX 2060. So rather than it costing $350 MSRP, although frequently, particularly for the reference design, you could get it a little bit cheaper, around the $330 mark. But now they've cut it down to just $300, which I'm sure they'll agree puts quite the squeeze on the RX 5600 XT. So, what do AMD do? Ultimately, there were two decisions that AMD could make. The most logical one that a lot of people suspected was that they would simply decrease the price. But instead, they chose to do option number 2, which is to increase the performance of the GPUs by releasing a new VBIOS. And this story was originally posted by HKEPC, although various websites including videocards.com did great investigation by looking at various official pages of different manufacturers. Anyway, long story short, the memory clock as well as the core clock has been beefed up on the RX 5600 XT. So, for example, if we look at the Sapphire Pulse, the 5600 XT 6GB model, we see the boost clock now at 1750 MHz, which is up around 130 MHz. Well, I say around, it is 130 MHz. And we also have the game clock rise from 1560 MHz up to 1615 MHz. Memory is also increased as well. So from 12 Gbps effective up to 14 Gbps effective. And because of that, the power consumption is also increased just a little bit, not drastically. It goes from 150 watt up to 160 watts. So how much of a performance jump is this? Well, around 10%. We're going to have to wait for the reviews to come out to see how well it stacks up against the 2060 as well as the 5700 vanilla, but according to results discovered by Tim Apisak, looking at FSE, Firestrike Extreme, we are now looking at 10,800-ish points from the 9,700-ish points, and Firestrike Ultra also has around a 10% increase in performance as well. This means that at stock, the card will now perform within around 10%-ish of the vanilla 5700, which means it's going to be fascinating to see what happens if you can overclock this card more for A, and also, does this mean that it's now basically rendering the RX 5700 pointless? Although, of course, you can soft mod the 5700. I also suspect that the card will probably be memory bandwidth constrained, because it is still only using 192-bit bus. I do suspect that 6GB is not going to really be an issue for now, though, in terms of the amount of memory. It's more just the bandwidth itself. From one piece of AMD news concerning their graphics to another piece of AMD news concerning their graphics, albeit this time with a very different performance category. Just around the time of E3, AnandTech posted an interview which was a roundtable discussion with various journalists where Lisa Su was asked numerous questions concerning Zen 3 and of course their roadmap for GPUs, and would there be a high-end Navi card incoming. And she did confirm that it would be released this year. And of course, she also doubled down on the fact that they were happy with their ray tracing solutions and so on and so on. I covered this quite extensively just a while ago. But what's rather interesting is there has been a new video posted on AMD's official YouTube channel. The video is titled The Bring Up, and the guest of the show was actually Lisa Su herself. And she did confirm that a high-end Navi was coming in 2020, but she actually used a slightly different word. She said Big Navi.
And I've heard a little bit through Twitter and Reddit that people are wondering about Big Navi, and I can say you're going to see Big Navi in 2020.
Now the reason I find those two phrases slightly different is because high-end can reference kind of like high-end for that particular line of SKUs. And this is how I'm perceiving it anyway. So for example, technically speaking, the RX 5700 XT is the high-end card in the RDNA lineup right now because it is the fastest card you can get outside of, the the Radeon 7. But big would indicate that it's going to be a larger die than what we currently have, with more compute units on board. So what I'm hearing, as regular viewers will know, is that there's going to be Navi 21 and Navi 23. Most of my sources seem to hint that 23 is the larger of the two pieces of silicon, because Navi 21 Lite is going to form the basis of the Xbox, but the larger piece of silicon is going to remain exclusively for PCs. It looks like, obviously, this stuff could be changing as we get more information, but it looks like Navi 23 is going to be the higher end piece of silicon, potentially having up to 80 compute units, which would be roughly double the size of the current generation RDNA. It's also interesting because AMD are stating that ray tracing is going to be extremely important, and that the ecosystem of ray tracing is still in its early days, which I'm sure you will agree. And not to mention the fact that the next generation consoles will also support hardware ray tracing as well. It's going to be fascinating to see how all of this evolves over the next couple of years, because ray tracing is more than just pretty graphics. I actually go into this quite extensively with Neil Trevitt in an interview. I actually conducted that yesterday, so we do go into a lot of detail about the future of computer graphics, ray tracing, the next generation consoles, and so much more besides. So look out for that over the next week or so. It's quite a long interview, so it's going to take some time to edit, unfortunately. But before I close out the video, I'd like to discuss a few pieces of news regarding the next generation consoles. One piece of news pertains to a potential sequel to the Order 1886, which of course was one of the early games launched for the PlayStation 4 and was developed by Ready at Dawn. They have confirmed, that is the developer, that they are working on a new AAA console game, but they haven't actually specified any details as things tend to be. But what's really interesting is that a post on NeoGAF by the individual known as Osiris Black claims that they have some information regarding an alleged PlayStation 5 and even Xbox Series X game. They don't want to identify what that title is. So this is not some anonymous poster who has no track record. Osiris actually hinted a lot of the details for the PlayStation 4 Pro prior to the announcement, several months actually prior to the announcement. So I would say that he's got a pretty good track record personally. Anyway, in short, he said that he saw a brief gameplay trailer with a man with a shoulder-mounted light device, and he was basically looking around a dimly lit room, firing and then running away from a creature with multiple arms. And no, not two, many arms. Many arms. And he said that, I quote, the monster was taunting him, almost singing, and then said, "I found you." And then the game's title appears. Osiris has not provided details of what that title is, but what he has said, and this is the thing that I find a lot more interesting, honestly, than, oh, it's potentially an Order 1887 game, and that is that the graphics are apparently astounding. Not only are we looking at incredible physics in the title, but apparently the lighting is, quote, on another level. And while there is a lot of talk at the moment regarding the GPU performance of the next generation consoles and what frame rate it's going to be capable of pumping out and what resolution it's going to be capable of pumping out, to me, I really want to see improvements to lighting and physics in games, because I think that that really does break the immersion. I use this example quite frequently, but there's nothing more immersion breaking in, say, Grand Theft Auto when you're charging along at like 100 miles per hour or something, and then you crash into a bush, and the bush just completely and utterly stops the car. Or there's like a fence post that's like, you know, made out of wood that looks like it's rotten and super duper flimsy and wouldn't stop a pencil if you threw it at it hard enough. But yet, you can have a herd of elephants run into that thing and it just doesn't break. Because obviously, we still have a lot of limitations with game engines. So to me, I really want to see what the next generation can bring. And when I hear stuff like this, it's tantalizing and gets my brain going of like, what can we see with the next generation of physics? We've seen already AMD show off FemFX, which looks pretty cool, where you can have deformable materials which will react to, let's say, heat or pressure, and it looks pretty good. Obviously, it's still early days yet, and it's an open source project, essentially, so people can make it fit their game engine and their requirements. But with that, ray tracing, better AI, better overall visual quality, I very much look forward to seeing what the new generation of games can bring to the table. And the final piece of news I'd like to discuss with you today concerns the PlayStation 5 and Dualshock 5. These patents for the Dualshock 5 revolve around the adaptive triggers that we've been hearing so much about. And one example they provided was for climbing mechanics. Basically, each of the triggers represent the character's hands, and the tilt of the gamepad itself represents almost like the grip. So if you press the buttons too loosely, just like when you're gripping hold of anything, it will slip out of your hands. If you grip it too tightly though, the grip may break off, and no, I don't mean of the gamepad itself, so therefore you need to balance the right amount of pressure, which would be indicated to you via the noise, visual cues in the game itself, as well as the vibration of the controller. However, a second part of this controller patent was more interesting, because they explained it for a cutting mechanic. I'm going to read this out verbatim. The gamepad is tilted to control the angle of, for example, an electrical circular saw relative to the target object. When not in contact with the object, the vibration and audio from the controller speaker can impart the idle state of the saw. You control the saw motor with a trigger. When you tilt the saw into contact with the object, the vibration can indicate the contact and start of the cut. You pull the trigger to activate the saw and start cutting into the object. A force is applied back to the motion of the trigger that depends on the material. So wood might impart a small resistive force, and stone would impart a strong resistive force. As you cut through the object, the vibration and the grips will change versus the idle state. And when you finally cut clear through the object, the trigger resistance gives way to nothing, and the controller sound and vibration return to the idle state. The idea is to give you a different sense of resistance when cutting through various objects, and the sense of breaking through when you finish the cut. So I must say I am kind of in two minds about this, because I'm someone that really hates controller vibration. Not because I have any problems with my hands or anything like that, it's just always bugged me. I remember even when we saw rumble added to the PS1 controller, and I was just like, nope, that's being turned off right away. I really didn't like it. Although the idea of having this type of interactivity in a game could be interesting depending on how it's implemented. I think this is going to be one of those things I'm going to have to kind of play around with a little bit and see how I feel about it in maybe a per game basis. I'm really hoping though it's not kind of forced on you like motion controls back in the day, because I also suspect that some people who maybe have issues with their hands may have problems with this otherwise. Anyway, I think that's just about it for this particular video. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. If you did, then the normal stuff. Like, share, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.